Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Mastering Your Recruiting Funnel for 2018. It does seem crazy that we're entering Q4 and getting ready for next year. We are really thrilled to share with you our insights and our learnings, and I hope some of this will be not only kind of motivational and inspirational and give you that boost, but also just really practical in how you think about mastering your recruiting funnel. So my name is Rachel Biddy, and I'm the Chief People Officer here at Jobvite. And I'm going to step you through a little bit of our agenda here, and then, of course, hand this off to my co-presenter, Matt, as well, here at Jobvite. And a little bit about my background. I have nearly 20 years of HR experience, both began my career as a recruiter, but then also moved into the HR business partner line and left HR for a while and came back. So have a lot of experience in the tech industry in particular. But really thrilled to get a chance to work so much in this space and really thinking about recruiting as such an integral part of a business's success. From an agenda perspective, we're going to go through a handful of things. First and foremost, we're going to talk about how the recruiting industry is continuing to evolve. And then, of course, what that means for recruiters' jobs and how that's expanding our roles and our responsibilities. We're going to go through a little bit of the new candidate-based strategy as we talk about it. So I'm thrilled to kind of look at those components. And then really thinking about managing recruiting like a business and thinking about the things that we could be doing a little bit differently to help our businesses succeed in that area. So I will hand it off to my co-presenter, Matt, to introduce himself a little bit and talk about Jobvite.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm excited to be on today's webinar. I think we have a good 1-2 punch with Rachel and I. Hopefully there's some good takeaways from today's content. My background is in HR software, so I've been in the industry for 12 plus years and been with Jobvite for the last 5 and have really grown to kind of become obsessed with the parallels between marketing and recruiting, and we'll talk a lot about that in today's webinar. And so just jumping into a quick overview of Jobvite and what we do. You can see sort of our set of products on the right here, and we've juxtaposed that with the various stages in the funnel that you guys as recruiters are working through. And so you can see we have a career site product at the top of the funnel for building that employment brand, kind of that storefront experience for prospective candidates and job seekers. We have a product called Jobvite Engage, which gives you the opportunity to build a CRM, a database of passive candidates, and market to them with landing pages, and email campaigns, social campaigns. And then a traditional ATS that includes video screening and onboarding at the bottom, and then analytics and reporting built across all of that. And we have many customers on the entire platform, but we also offer the products a la carte so that recruiters can kind of go at their own pace. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about Jobvite. So why don't we go ahead and jump into the content. So as I mentioned earlier, the parallels between marketing and recruiting are really fascinating, and coming to Jobvite gave me the opportunity to kind of see those firsthand. And so what we've done here is just kind of shown some of those parallels in terms of the two funnels. So my background traditionally has been in the operations and optimization of the funnel as a marketer. And, I have a strong belief in the data and emergence of data as the reason that marketing and the CMO has been, has emerged as a more strategic role within the organization. 20 years ago, we didn't have CMOs, and I think that data and the ability to track that data is why we now have a seat at the executive table. And I think that HR and recruiting has been on a very similar path, and that lack of tracking and data had somewhat marginalized the function as we had been in marketing. And so I think it's a great opportunity. It definitely adds to the strategic importance of the function. And so, I think that really what we're going to focus on today is knowing that data is what's empowering recruiters in HR. What are some of the ways that you can harness that data and optimize your funnel from that first look all the way down to their first day at the office. All right, so why don't we jump into the content then? All right. So yeah, much like what's happened with the emergence of the internet, something similar is happening in the recruiting world. So, I'm sure for many of you on the call right now, you're feeling the pain of hiring. The economy is very strong. It's definitely a buyer's market right now. And some of the high-level changes that we're seeing across the industry is, that first point which I've made about the candidates and sort of their ability to pick and choose. So that's one of the big points. And we've all heard about this sort of the millennials emerging and the baby boomers exiting the workforce, what that's doing in terms of the talent crunch, education and the need for skilled workers. So there's a variety of factors that are driving an excess of demand and a shortage of supply. The third point is that similarity between marketing and recruiting in terms of the amount of research that folks can do, both the recruiters in looking for candidates as well as the candidates researching companies where they would potentially like to work. And we'll go into more detail around that one later in the presentation. And then lastly, because of this competitive market, the speed with which you work candidates through the funnel is critical. Every stage is important, and any bottlenecks that you have in your funnel can be a huge disadvantage in that war for talent. All right. So, as I mentioned, this transparency and the pervasive availability of technology is really changing the way that marketers market and the ways that recruiters recruit. So we'll go into more details on this point as well, but it's really the idea that you can learn so much more about a company, much like consumers can learn about a product or organization before they actually engage with that vendor. And we're seeing something similar happening in recruiting. So you've got candidates who are able to research you on Glassdoor, look at your social media presence, look at current employees and alumni on LinkedIn. So the metaphor that we use at Jobvite is to really start thinking about yourself like a dean of admissions at a university, and the idea that job seekers are approaching their career much like they approached their education, in the sense that the tenures are decreasing. So you can think about it in terms of some employees, many these days, will only stay for what would be equivalent to like an associate's degree, where they stay for 2, maybe 3 years at the company. And then you have folks that stay 4 or 5 for a bachelor's, and occasionally you'll get people who stay for that postgraduate degree and stick around for 5, 6+ years. And so in that regard, they're evaluating everything like they would a university, since they're not going to be there as long. They really want to know what it's going to do to empower them with skills to set them up for their next opportunity. And so you really need to be thinking about that. Things like, the campus at the university being your office, the admissions being the recruiters, the teachers being the current employees, alumni being former employees. And so, using that metaphor, I think, is a helpful way to approach the problem. And again, just know that the candidates are researching you, whether or not you're taking a proactive strategy about your presence online. So rather than hide from the problem, our recommendation is to really set forth some strategies in terms of how you can position against that, take control of your presence on social media and online, so that they do formulate a positive impression of your employment brand. All right. All right. Rachel, you want to take over from here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. It definitely is part of, when you think about the context of what's going out there, it makes it really real for our jobs on a daily basis. We're going to talk a little bit about, how has this changed our roles as recruiters, and then in some cases as TA leaders and HR leaders overseeing this function. I've definitely been very fortunate to be, Chief People Officer that gets a chance to do the entire component here at Jobvite. But also, as a TA leader, as a TA manager, as well as an HR leader. And then also most recently, I actually owned a requisition here at Jobvite. So I actually got to sit in that recruiter seat, which I haven't sat in for a little bit. And it is definitely more complex. The business is demanding so much more. At the same time, our budgets are getting tighter in some cases. And so we're having to do more with less, and to really be smart about how we're thinking about leveraging our dollars in our budgets with regards to the recruiting demands, but also just that experience component that Matt's talking about. Your candidates having a great experience, your hiring managers and recruiters and finance and marketing all working really well together is a critical component. So just going to highlight a couple things around when we think about the funnel and how this has really changed. I remember back in the day when it was really about reviewing resumes that came to you and closing that candidate. And so as a recruiter, we had this plethora of talent that was coming into our systems or into our inboxes that we could just evaluate and go through. And our primary value that we added to the organization at that time was around assessment skills and closing skills. My early days as a recruiter would have been to a whole bunch of ex-military recruiters, and boy, did they know how to close. So that was a skill that I learned early on, and I think a lot of us had to. That was the big part of what the work was about. And then we really went into heavy sourcing. This is when I think, not only the markets got competitive, but in the tech world, I think for others in different industries, it is dependent upon their timing, where you really had to go after those passive candidates. And so that heavy sourcing ended up looking like, are you really posting your opportunities in the right areas to catch attention so that you got quality candidates, but that you were also really going after passive candidates. And so we've all leveraged all kinds of tools to go try to find that talent. Our value at this point really then was around are you being strategic about where you're looking for that talent? Became some heavier hunting skills as we do the comparison between sales and marketing. We were no longer farming, we were hunting and going out there and looking for that talent. And wooing skills became you wanted to catch somebody's attention, whether it was a very crafted individual outreach or you wooed them actually at events sometimes too. So that's where the shift started to happen for heavy sourcing, which I know many of you are probably deep in as well right now. The next thing you really started to see emerge was not only building and maintaining your employer brand, but I also think of it as leveraging the company brand as well. And so Matt spoke about this, that candidates are really evaluating your company and your culture, really before they're almost interviewing now. It used to be that they would do research later in the process, and that is actually happening even sooner. And so really, and I think of this isn't about having an extensive budget, or it really is about leveraging current assets that you already have. And so the important component that we played as recruiters and TA leaders in this space was really about being creative, and as well as the partnership with marketing and the rest of HR. And so everything from really thinking about leveraging a bunch of the materials that your marketing organization may already be building to showcase the company brand, partnering with your existing HR organization to understand what are some of the current employee experiences and stories that we could be telling candidates. And so that really became a partnership change, as well as I think a more of a creative bent in thinking about how do you showcase your company and what's unique about you. I know for some this stage was a little challenging at first because it felt like, oh gosh, I'm going to have a big budget, and the reality is you don't. You can really leverage a lot of what you already have, whether it's a fun photo at a volunteer event that you can put out on Instagram that really shows something about your company and what you care about and your values. It's really important. The next one that we started to all really focus on is onboarding. And as we all know, the competition for talent, the business needs were, the business need isn't really met until that talent is actually on board and fully ramped. And so we also saw recruiting start to be measured a little bit more on the quality of their hire, but also the retention of that talent. And so this onboarding component has definitely become important. There has definitely been increases around the globe around the candidates accepting multiple offers, some not showing up, right? And so the statistics are very much showing that we need to be thinking about their entire experience until they're really fully ramped, not just even here. And so we talk about the value that we bring in that space is around the candidate experience and really thinking about that entire end-to-end. And I know for some at first it might feel like, gosh, as a recruiter's job, it's never really quite done. And the answer is, you're right. How do you then have those candidates become new hires who then become maybe leads for other referrals? And so it's making sure that you have that continuous candidate engagement and experience that is really phenomenal. So then the fun part is, like as Matt was really talking about, this is what I love about the work we get to do in recruiting is that, I get to go to Matt and be like, Matt, what about this? And how does this work in marketing? And we have some, I'm sure we all have marketing and sales within our company, and our CEOs and our CFOs very much understand the sales and marketing funnel. And so you've got a great stakeholders who understand this concept. And so how do you really kind of look at all of this from a recruiting perspective? And you pull all of these pieces together, you really get a chance to kind of look at how are you optimizing the experience through the funnel, but how are you also optimizing all of your resources, whether it's people resources or budget resources, to really be effective and efficient in your hiring practices. And this takes what we often call both a creative and an analytical work in this space. And I've always loved folks that can take the data and analyze it, but also really have a great creative view of thinking about that candidate experience. And so we've got kind of two parts we want to share with you about this, and we do kind of think of it as a little bit as left brain and right brain, right? And so that being really data-driven and really understanding where something might be breaking down in your funnel, and having the data to show, gosh, my offer acceptance ratio is not at benchmark, and then being able to dig in and why is that, and getting to the root cause and figuring that out. Really proving the return on the investment. There's some incredible things that we've been doing recently around targeted campaigns going after talent pools, and it is really fun to just kind of leverage a little bit of creative with a very great list, and it doesn't cost a lot, and it can be really targeted, and have the return on that happen with not only hires but great candidates that are knowing more about your company's opportunities that they have out there. And then, of course, really finding a way to make this repeatable. The hard part is that sometimes you've got to figure out the root cause of where something's not working and then adjust appropriately. But then when you do find something that's working, you just keep putting, gas on that part of the engine, and it just continues to work really well. And so making that repeatable and automate as much as you can at times can really be just rewarding to get some of that mundane components of the funnel kind of off your plate and working in that way with your systems and your tools. The creative part, which is really thinking about your audience. We talk about, just very much like the marketing and sales funnel, we're trying to get those customers to come on board, and they do make decisions with how they feel about something. And same thing for candidates. Are you really thinking about how to very directly engage them in an engaging way? Are you really able to articulate what is unique about your company and your organization or that role? I love that we talk about storytelling here, and really being able to leverage your existing employees' voices in that storytelling. And this really becomes kind of the ways that you catch people's attention. And I'll share with you, like, we're doing some campaigns right now that if we're targeting sales folks, we're a little bit more people-oriented in our creative that we're looking at. If we're targeting some of our engineering folks, we're being a little bit more technical in the tools and the technology that they'd be working on. And so really thinking about how do you target in a creative way that is going to catch that potential candidate's attention really kind of becomes the fun part of the brain that you get to leverage as well too. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about this new candidate-based strategy. We talk about, definitely, it feels like the candidates are very much in control. I know that we all have those times when, gosh, we feel like, we're up against multiple offers, and that's true. And even when we're trying to catch people's attention, they've got lots of different places they could be looking for opportunities. And so the days used to be where applicants were really seeking jobs. They were coming to us as companies. And that has really shifted, and has really much more been about, the jobs are seeking the applicants, and how are we getting out there, and how are we making sure that we have a very customized and engaging approach. And by engaging, we really mean often personalized, right? And really being able to think about what's important to that potential prospect or candidate in the mix. The other thing we really talk about is from first touch to first day. And so think of this as kind of a continuous candidate engagement, or even, a candidate experience. We talk a lot on the HR business partner work around employee experience and employees being engaged at work. Very similar kind of approach as we think about candidates. They may read an article about your company somewhere, and that sparks their interest. Then at babies, they start to see the name and they know the brand that goes with that, all the way through to that onboarding experience. And candidates are looking for a lot of transparency and authenticity, but also some consistency. So you're also wanting to make sure that you're thoughtful about all of the experiences that you're mapping out and making sure that they kind of come into those components. With that, I'd love to hand it over to Matt. He's going to talk us through kind of like 4 ways that you can really think about amping up that candidate-based strategy. For those of you who have the luxury of having a strategic marketing leader in your organization and you haven't spent time with them and just shadowed them and understood their business, I really encourage you to do this because this is something you can leverage a great deal in the recruiting side of the house. So off to you, Matt.
All right, thank you, Rachel. And when Rachel and I were putting the content together for this, we were talking about, kind of what we look for in a talk and a webinar, and ultimately we want this to be useful for you guys who are listening to today's webinar. And so, I think our goal was to tee up the strategy in the first part and then give you guys some practical, usable processes that you can implement right away in your own recruiting efforts. So we'll jump into that stuff now. Okay, so, it's very much like marketing. So as I talked about at the beginning, the parallels between recruiting and marketing are unquestionable. And so really what I'm taking you through here is something that you could slap this right into a marketing presentation in terms of, how to begin your outbound marketing efforts and build your company brand. Could say the exact same thing about marketing. So the first step, and just kind of logically working from top to bottom with the funnel, is the idea that you need to segment your database. So the point that Rachel just made about the personalization of content, which we'll talk a little bit more about, that's critical in both marketing and recruiting. The recruiters are competing with so many other companies. The candidates have so much noise in their inbox and their social media that you really need to target your audiences. And, don't be intimidated by this. I think a simple taxonomy can be a fine place to start. The way I think about it is, you can really just think about it a spreadsheet. You've got a column of candidate names and a column of candidate emails, ideally social media handles if you have that, and then just kind of pick your first 2 variables. Some of the most common ones we see are things like geographic location, areas of expertise, and source, where you found that individual. And so once you have some basic tags like that, you can start to segment those folks and do some outbound campaigns to them. And so when we talk about the campaigns, there's a couple ways you can do it. In marketing, we talk about push and pull marketing. So there's messages where you're trying to, pull in the prospective candidates through things like your career website and your social media presence. And then you've got your push marketing like email campaigns and landing pages where you're pushing stuff out, driving stuff into their inboxes or into their worlds so that they'll hopefully consume it. And these are just a couple of examples here. So on the left, you can see one that's a more explicit offer where the Tenable, one of the Jobvite customers, their goal here is to drive folks to actually apply. And then on the right with Telerik, you can see they've got a talent pool set up on their career site so that they can continue to build out that CRM. And you can see the jobs of interest in that bottom field there is one of their tags, right? And so this is something that we do for many of our customers through the CRM. But, if you're in the initial stages, like I said, you can start with a spreadsheet because when you do shift over to a technology like Jobvite, you're going to need that spreadsheet anyways. So, a huge win can simply be build that spreadsheet, come up with some basic tags, and just start sending out a quarterly email with basic updates on what's happening at the company just to keep those candidates, passive candidates, engaged in the process. Okay, so, basically what we've talked about so far, these first couple steps, is that you've got your list of folks that you want to go after. You've kind of got your push marketing strategy in place. And then the other one is kind of that pull marketing, right? It's sort of what does that overall employer brand look like? So as Rachel mentioned, one of the good ways to do that is to work with marketing and the broader HR team as well as the executive team to kind of, assess the employment brand. What are the strengths and weaknesses? I think the third point here is critical about finding a consistent and authentic voice. I think the authentic one is a piece that often gets muddled because of this natural tendency for companies to want to appear to be a hot, hyper-growth, rocket ship company. And, if you create that employer brand externally, that better be what it's like inside your company. Otherwise, you're just creating a poor candidate experience, and they're going to come in and feel like it was a bait and switch in terms of what they were told versus what they got. And the other thing is this misconception that everybody wants to be at a rocket ship. There's plenty of people who are afraid of rocket ships crashing, because most of them do. And they don't want to take that risk, and they'd rather be with, a big, strong company, perhaps work-life balance, benefits, the consistency of the brand is really what the company is about. And so you should own that, right, and exude that in all channels, not just on the career site, but in your social media presence and in the campaigns that you're running out to your prospective candidates. Okay, so as I said, you really want to share that story. So once you've got the story, you're in agreement internally on what that's going to look like. Just try to make it as human as possible. The feedback we get from customers is that, they have more success when they try to basically humanize the site as much as possible. So things like an intro video from the CEO on the main careers page, an intro video from department heads as I drill in and look at engineering and marketing and finance jobs, that I'm actually getting to hear from the head of that department to understand what it's like. Commentary from individuals within those different departments. If I'm going to be an engineer, that basically I can get a good idea of what a day in the life of an engineer looks like at that organization. And then, lastly is just the simplicity of navigation. So sharing the story is the content, but it's also the delivery method. So be thinking about things like friction on the site. How easily can I navigate the site on both a desktop and a mobile device? If I choose to apply for a job, how easily can I apply for a job? So one of the basic tests is to just go onto your career site on a mobile device. And oftentimes the career site itself will look great, but when you click apply and go to actually submit your resume for a job, the site blows up, right? Because it's a different underlying technology that's driving the career site versus the apply pages. And our recommendation for our customers is to do it all in one shot. So with Jobvite, both the career site and the apply process are mobily optimized, and you're really damaging the employer brand if you have a mobile career site and not a mobile apply process. So that's kind of a few tactical points to think about. In addition to the story you're telling, is sort of the medium and the method for how you're telling that story. Okay, so basically thus far what we've said is, you've built a CRM, you've targeted who you're going after, you've started doing the outbound campaigns to those folks, you've started, focusing on the inbound employer brand through things like your career site, Glassdoor presence, social media presence. And so basically, you've got all your pieces in place. Now it's time to scale and repeat those programs. So at this step, you really want to assess the process. So you've launched the programs. You need to take a look at what's working, what's not working, figure out where you need to optimize, scale the things that are working, and those that aren't, continue testing and try different things, test different subject lines, test different content, days of week, time of day. There's lots of variables within the whole recruitment marketing piece. So just be thinking about that. Test variables one by one and just optimize over time. Okay. And then lastly, for me, is the change management journey. And I know that Rachel will go into more detail on this because she's been on the receiving side of it as a head of HR, and I've more been on the delivery side of it. So, an example, there's two ways that it happens, and it depends on your organization. But one way is you've got an existing process that you want to change, right? And that has its own set of initiatives around it. So an example would be when I came into Jobvite, we were scaling and growing as an organization, and we really needed to change the way that we were marketing versus an early stage company that's just starting that journey. And so, with change management comes obviously metrics. So the number one thing is that you're going to want to come with some data, and at a very minimum, it's baseline data of where you are today as an organization. And then you want to evangelize that, right? Don't just limit it to hiring managers or just executives. Take the time to really understand, who are going to be your town criers within each of the business units that you care about. Align with those folks and get their help driving the initiative. And then the second thing is, what we talked about in the top half of the presentation is that there is this macroeconomic shift in the labor market and the way that recruiters are recruiting. And so don't assume that others in the organization are aware of that. So I went through the same thing as a marketer with sort of this marketer's myopia, where I assume everybody knows that, content is becoming pervasive across the web and we have to start targeting and changing the way that we're marketing. I made the mistake of assuming that everybody knew that. And so, learn from that and know that they probably need a little bit of education up front, like the stuff we showed you, just a couple of slides, some data points to sort of validate why you're trying to drive this change across the organization. So that's it on this front. I'm going to pass it back over to Rachel to kind of go into some of the tops-down perspective and what she looks for when she's worked with recruiters who are driving this type of process.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I do think that the change journey is a really big part of probably what folks are dealing with, is that you might be reacting to something that's currently going on in your organization. And we talk about those as you have a burning platform, meaning like you have a problem that gets to be solved. And so like that's a great place to be, of catching people's attention and focus on this within your company. But the other part that you're probably also thinking about and looking at some of these best practices is about creating a future vision, and that can be just as galvanizing to get an organization around to drive that change in how you're thinking about approaching candidates from an experience perspective. And so think about both of those, right? Sometimes we've got a burning platform because it's on fire and we got to go fix it, and the other times is we actually get to help create a vision of what great could look like. And so I think it's important to leverage both of those in that change journey. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of managing recruiting like a business, and this is kind of what I love about a big part of what we get to do in HR and the work that we have. It has a very direct impact to the company being successful and hiring that great talent and retaining that talent. I'm just going to talk a little bit about, the fact that everybody seems to really want to know what we're up to, right? And so talk about, this is the wonder and the greatness of getting to be part of a strategic role in a company, is that folks really want to know, like, what are you all working on? What's going on? And this isn't just from your boss. It's also all your hiring managers. It can be all your hiring teams. It can also be your partners in marketing and finance that are looking at headcount forecasting. And so that's you've got folks that are interested in kind of how you're tracking things, how you're leveraging your resources, your entire recruiting budget as well. And you might have things pop up as like, hey, when's that key role going to get filled, right? Because they're trying to determine how to deliver for the business. And oftentimes folks will be like, what's your strongest source of hire? Like, do you know that for your business? Not only just for the actual hire, but maybe even just for applicants. And then how are we determining the quality of a hire? How do we determine that? What makes that differentiation? And so those are important components, I think. All these questions, and this is just a couple questions. The reality is there's even more questions than this. But if you really look at your recruiting funnel, you can take a look at all of that and figure that out. I'm just going to share with you, we've been talking a little bit about kind of the multiple components within recruiting. And I'm just going to highlight a couple simple ones around candidate experience and hiring manager, and then we're going to dive a little bit more into the funnel part. So we talk about this candidate strategy is changing, and so I do think that candidate experience is something you're going to want to start to take a look at. Is it engaging experience? We often are looking at new hires and saying, gosh, did everything we tell you about the job and the company actually match? And so we talk about it being an expectations match. We've all been there where something didn't match, and that isn't good either. You're also looking at the success of the ramping of that onboarding. So are they ramping at the rate that we are expecting them to ramp to make sure they deliver for the business? We also are looking at some net promoter scores. Like if you're a new hire, would you recommend the company for someone else to come work here? Would you recommend your new boss? Would you recommend the recruiter that you got to work with? And so we do look at net promoter across the spectrum here. The second one we think about is your hiring managers. And when I say hiring managers, I mean the hiring manager, the VP, the executive that's in there as well. It could be the whole spectrum of your key kind of partners and stakeholders in this work that you do. And they're really the ones that can help with the quality, I think, of their measurement around the quality of the hire and their perspective on is the person ramping at the rate that they wanted them to ramp, and how is that onboarding going. We talk about a hiring manager batting average. It's kind of a fun statistic. Chris Dunn, who's a partner with us, has some great information on that. If you've never seen it, go check it out. It's pretty cool. We all have known this where we've had hiring managers that are great hiring manager partners and some that struggle. And so I think of it as identifying your managers that might be new to recruitment or new to hiring, and how do you help them be more successful. And then, of course, the hiring manager is also kind of giving a bit of a net promoter score on the recruiter. So those are two of the pillars that I tend to think about. This third one is where we spend a lot of time in looking at our recruiting funnel. And so the first one I have here is hiring to the business need. And so definitely I encourage organizations to think about that. If you have a hiring plan for this next business year, what is that actual plan? What is the targeted, types of roles? What locations do they need to be? When do they need to be onboarded and ramped? And being able to build your recruiting engine to deliver for that business need. Now, we do know that when you have backfills, it's a little bit of, do we know that attrition was coming? Maybe we should start to know more of that attrition might be happening. And so that, I think, is the fundamental important component at the overarching level is, are you actually helping the business succeed in hiring to that business need? And then there's others of the metrics that you see a little more traditionally of like speed to hire, quality. Is the candidate flow throughout your funnel kind of in the right arena? Are you actually getting the numbers of hires? What's your source of hires? Are you getting the return on your investment in your programs on the bringing them into the top of the funnel? And then also looking at diversity effectiveness. This is something I know a lot of companies have been focusing on, of how to attract talent as well as to have them go through the process. But then also looking at your talent pools. Are you starting to target user experience talent or data scientists? And really thinking about, is that effective and efficient, because you're probably putting people hours as well as dollars against that program. So let me just, let's kind of tie this up with the funnel. We really look at benchmarking here. And so what's great about the Jobvite platform is we got lots of data to share with you. And so just as Matt had talked about, that top of the funnel is where you have your potential website visitors. And this is about visitors to applicants. And you guys can see the stats here. It's a little bit over 8%. And then you have applications to the actual open requisitions. And you can see the correlation to the marketing and sales funnel that's just underneath there. And so that's about, really it takes about 52 to make that happen. And then you look at the applications to the interviews, and then interview to offer, and then offer acceptance, which of course tends to be the highest statistic there at 83%. And just a note on the bottom here, recruiting, when we look at the very beginning to end, it's a 0.2%. And so think of that as statistically from an overarching benchmarking perspective, and this is all of our data that we have with the millions and millions of applicants with thousands of customers. It takes about 500 kind of visitors to a website that's actually going to lead to a hire. Marketing also equally has the very beginning to end, which is 0.9%, and they take about 110 inquiries in order to get one deal that can happen. And so now, mind you, we recognize that different industries or different locations in the country or different roles might be faster or slower too, and we also have a timeline that we've matched to this. But I think it's important to understand what are some of the best benchmarking out there, and then you can evaluate your own organization and how that's working, and where you may have some opportunities. So we'll talk about just kind of things to keep in mind. We encourage you is really build that hiring strategy for the year. And then I also say, build mechanisms to continually update. One of the things that we do here at Jobvite is we literally sit down with the executive on a monthly basis with the HR business partner and the recruiting team and say, what's changing, right? Is something changing your hiring plan? Do we think we might be having some attrition? Are we thinking about changing that role up a little bit? Are we going to reorg? Are we, aligning? Are we doing some promotions and growth of talent within the organization? So it's always great to have that strategy, but you got to continually be looking at it from a business perspective. And then I do think that there is tons of data you could be looking at, but really kind of think about what are the most important ones that are going to help inform your funnel. And so talk with your boss about that, your executives, when you're looking at your own business plan. Think about which data is going to be most telling and look at that. Of course, the benchmarking, we've got great stuff to share with you, kind of as a starting point. And you might also look internally, like statistically, how long has it taken for your organization to hire, those 400 customer care agents potentially, or how long has it statistically taken your company to hire, a data scientist in San Francisco, right? And then, of course, you really got to identify and address your bottlenecks. So it's important to take a look at and really figure out root cause of why something isn't working at the way that you wanted it. And then, of course, you've got the market keeps changing, and so making sure you keep coming back and taking a look at those benchmarks and figuring out how do you optimize for each quarter within your business. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Matt for our final takeaways.
All right, thank you, Rachel, and hopefully for those of you on the call, that was useful information. I know when I have the opportunity to hear from a CEO about what he or she is expecting from the marketing organization, I'm all ears because, that's obviously what makes us successful at the end of the day. And then in terms of just summarizing, the content we've gone over today. So first off is this concept of art and science, right? Left brain, right brain. It's just like marketing. You've got the science of the funnel and understanding the metrics we've taken you guys through and how to optimize those various stages. And then obviously the art side and the fact that the market has changed and, spray and pray, as we say in marketing, spray and pray content doesn't work anymore. You've got to take a targeted approach and then be really thoughtful about the nature of that content that you're delivering. When you get both sides down, then you're ready to run a recruiting team, just like in marketing. Our CEO is always telling me you've got to have a good command of both art and science to run a marketing organization. I think the same is true for recruiters. And then lastly, that engagement process, right? So we've used this phrase about, first look to first day, and really being mindful of the fact that they're looking at you before you're aware of it. So take a proactive strategy about that. And once you do have engagement with the candidates, have a strategy around how to engage them over time as they work their way through the funnel with the things we discussed, like landing pages, email content, Glassdoor, social media, your employment brand on your career site, and so forth. This is kind of implicit in the previous two, but it's about that proactive strategy. So they're already looking, whether or not you're conscious of it. So go after them. Come up with that push marketing strategy for 2018. At a very minimum, as I said, just build out that database, even in an Excel spreadsheet, and start out by sending simple emails out of your corporate email account once a month, once a quarter, just to begin that proactive outreach. And then finally, you need to benchmark, right? You're trying to optimize a funnel, so you need to start with some benchmarks. If you don't have any, hopefully the data that we've provided you today is a useful starting point and benchmarks on where to begin the journey. And then, figure out how you're doing after you've given it a month or a quarter, whatever your recruiting cycles are at your organization. Check in against those benchmarks, understand, what you need to do, and then, work with your broader team to improve on the areas where you aren't seeing the lift in conversion rates that you were after. Well, that's all the content that we have for today. Hopefully this has been a useful webinar for everyone that's taken the time out of their day to join, and thank you for that. If you've got any additional questions, we're going to be distributing the slides after the fact, and we'll include contact information, and so please feel free to reach out to us with any questions that came up during the presentation that we weren't able to cover on today's session. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.